Hello and welcome to the Joe Ligato Show. I'm your host, Dr. Joe Ligato, and today we're going to be talking about why Chinese democracy is better than Western democracy, according to, I don't know how to pronounce this, Tsinghua Professor Yan Yilong. Uh, so here, and this is from Sinification.com. Dear everyone, democracy is yet another field in which Beijing is competing with Washington and more generally with the West. China's aim may not be to convince others to adopt its political system per se, but it certainly appears intent on demonstrating that Chinese democracy is superior to what the West has to offer. And I completely agree with that so far, and I can tell you why if they don't end up covering it in this article. And I've skimmed this article. This is more of like somewhat of a reaction video, I guess I would say, but I've skimmed it just to make sure that it has the type of content that I would like to go over and react to. And there's some really interesting key parts here, so let's dive in. This was once again evident at the event organized by the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences in March, just days before US President Joe Biden co-hosted his second virtual Summit for Democracy. Blah, 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 blah. All right, let's get down to the good points. Okay, here's the summary. This is really what I want to go over here, the summary of the meeting. Although the West will not admit it, China's whole process, people's democracy, is not only true democracy at play, but is also a more functional type of democracy than that practiced in Western countries. So they vote on potential candidates over there, and then they have a party leadership, and that is mostly bureaucratic. I actually like to make the distinction between politicians and administrators or bureaucrats, whatever you want to call it. And the role of a politician is to woo you to win your vote by any means necessary. And the West has politicians. The East, such as China, has administrators or bureaucrats, whatever you want to call it, but they take orders from, in some instances, it used to be an emperor, but now they take orders from the people. They have to make the people satisfied. And so the job of bureaucrats or administrators is to, how do I put this? They listen to what the people want and they figure out the best way to actually implement it. And I think that's a far better system than the people tell you what they want, you parrot what they say in order to get their vote, and then you do whatever lobbyists want, which is the Western system. And so if you look at it as the function of any government is to satisfy the will of the people and to help the people in creating a prosperous life and a prosperous society, then Chinese democracy, Chinese form of governance, is doing a far better job of that than the West. Various Western democracies have anywhere between like 30% and single-digit percentage satisfaction rates, whereas Chinese democracy has something like Chinese form of governance has something like 90-some% satisfaction rate with the government. And so you can see that if the point is people are satisfied with the government and the direction of the country, then the Chinese system has a lot to offer there. Chinese democracy outclasses the Western democratic electoral systems because of the complex processes it has developed, which have allowed it to move closer towards the people being the masters of their own house. Unlike in China, procedural rather than substantive democracy best defines what is now practiced in the West. And I completely agree. That's pretty much what I just said, is the West goes through the process of you vote and that's it. That's a democracy in the West. It's you vote for something, and whether they actually carry it out in this representative democracy, that's up to them to decide. And 99% of the time, they're not going to decide in your favor unless, of course, it aligns with what the lobbyists want. And we've talked about this in a prior video where the Western world, particularly America, it's an oligarchical system. It's the rich people are the ones who actually influence policy. If the vast majority of people within a country believe something, it's not going to get changed unless the wealthy believe it too. So we see here that that's exactly what happens. It's a procedural democracy. That's what the West is. And China is a substantive democracy where they're actually implementing things that increases the satisfaction of its populace. Chinese democracy recognizes the existence of the people in its holistic sense. Only by doing so can one ensure the people's overall long-term and fundamental interest. And so you kind of see this as well, where the Western orientation is it's a dog eat dog world, or the rich rule, or whatever catchphrase you want to use for it. But they completely believe that if you're able to get one over on your fellow citizen, you absolutely have a right to do it. And if you have more money to throw around, you can even create advantages within the system that allows you to get one over, screw people over. Whereas in the East, particularly like China, your fundamental long-term interest is taking into account. They care about your well-being, which is something you don't see in the West, where in the West you might have pharmaceutical companies who create drugs that keep people addicted for the rest of their lives, or you might have food types of products that are heavily addictive and create an obesity epidemic, which gives you chronic health problems for life. Those are different ways that the system keeps you a consumer in the system. You keep having to buy more healthcare. You keep having to pay for procedures. You keep having to pay for more medication that will help treat your problem, but never actually cures it. But in China, they're actually trying to solve things in order to benefit the people. Okay? And this is tangible. This is obviously very easily seeable, viewable within China, because their people are just so satisfied with the system. Chinese democracy belongs to the majority, not to a minority as in the West. And we've talked about this. Research studies, very prestigious research studies, do show that the West is controlled by the 1%. Unlike in America, China is not owned by the 1%, governed by the 1%, and for the benefit of the 1%. And you could see that in how the system is structured, that the 1% has pretty much ultimate rule over things. They're pretty much never held accountable. I mean, look at the Ghislaine Maxwell type of crisis that was going on there. There's a list of people who exploited minors, and we're never going to see that list is never going to see the light of day. And the people on that list are never going to be held accountable for the things they did in that what was likely an intelligence operation. But it's horrific, and it's because of the fact that the 1% rule, and they're never held to account for their actions. Whereas in China, you obviously see a lot of leaders, a lot of big bankers, a lot of big business people who, if they step out of line, the government keeps them, punishes them severely for it. Because in a just world, the more benefits you have, the more consequences there are for bad actions. In an unjust world, like in the West, the more benefits you get, the more consequences other people get. And that's a horrifically unjust world. So we see low voter turnout in election-based political systems is another reason why, unlike China, electoral democracies are not able to represent the people as a whole. Okay, and we see extremely low voter turnout unless they're absolutely forced to vote. Like in some countries, I believe Australia, you're actually required to vote. Everyone's required to vote. But in America, you're not required to vote, and people just do not vote, really. Western elections have become a talent show where people vote for the best performer rather than for those who are best suited to govern. Completely true. And then those people who put on the best talent show, they're under no obligation to actually implement the things that they say they would implement. It's just, well, you got duped. It's your own fault for getting duped by this person who's an entertainer. The general population does not have the specialist knowledge nor the long-term perspective required to elect competent representatives who have their nation's best interests at heart. And I do agree with this. I think at the lowest levels, like they do in China, you should be allowed to elect your own representatives for local and maybe like a regional, statewide governance. But at the highest levels, you need people in charge who have a long-term vision. That's why I was not ever really, well, I shouldn't say not ever, but for my adult life, when I was a thinking being and I intentionally sought out information, I really wasn't against the idea of something like a monarchy, because really, as much as possible, you want people who are trained and experienced in being rulers. And I've said this in other videos, but it's the weirdest thing for me that in a political system, you have people who leave office every few years. When you have a CEO, if they're doing a good job, you keep them in office. If they're not doing a good job, they're removed from office. So it's just a strange system for me that if someone is doing a good job in a Western democracy, they're out of office after 8 years or whatever it is, depending on the democratic system. These ideas of term limits don't really make sense to me. It should be that if they're doing a good job, they're allowed to stay in office as long as they absolutely want to. And if they're doing a poor job, it should be very easy to remove people from office too. And so just think about that for a second. Every other industry, there is no industry where people are just removed from office after a finite amount of time, even if they're doing a good job. And for some reason, we've just accepted that that is how things go in the Western world. Okay. Chinese leaders are tested through practice, not through votes. And that's exactly what we're talking about. It's about experience. It's about, are you able to actually implement the things that the people want you to implement? Are they satisfied with what you're doing? If they are, you get to stay in office. If you're not doing a good enough job after you gain some experience at the job, after you get over the learning curve, then you're removed from office. Democracy in China thus ensures that political amateurs with no experience or qualifications cannot become its leaders. Okay, so you have to raise through the ranks. You start off at the local level, go to the regional level, maybe reach national level, and then you could become a Xi Jinping type of figure. Unlike in the West, China's political system allows democracy to be practiced at both the input and output levels. It's a system in which people are able to fully participate and one in which officials serve the people and actually get things done. Okay. I would like to know a little bit more about what they're trying to talk about here. Democracy to be practiced at both the input and output levels. I'll have to talk to some China experts to see what they mean by this, because this is just a summary of the event. Western democracies encourage competition, confrontation, the fragmentation of interest, which leads to constant political bickering and deadlocks. This is an interesting point here, but I've always taken on what I call the Slytherin from Harry Potter series mentality about things, where you can have political infighting within house, but you don't show that to the rest of the world, and you don't have a divide and conquer strategy. Like, you don't see, I don't know, Draco Malfoy and Daphne Greengrass from Harry Potter, like, arguing in public in front of the other houses. If they have any political infighting, then they do it behind closed doors in the Slytherin common room, things like that. In the West, you have these different political parties that get into long, drawn-out fights, like really merciless, vicious attacks against each other, and then you expect people to be able to work together and create a functional government after that, and it just doesn't happen. People take these things personally, especially if you publicly humiliate them. So there's no real winning in this, because you're not actually persuading people, you're just humiliating your opposition. And that's what the West is. It creates this fragmentation within society. And guess what? In the Communist Party of China, CPC, they have differences. Their people, I'm sure, have a ton of differences. There are different factions, different cliques within the party, but they handle that within the party instead of publicly humiliating each other, like is the kind of reality TV show that we see on our TV screens whenever we see Western politicians talking about each other. And so, yeah, it encourages competition. It's not healthy competition. It encourages confrontations. It's not healthy confrontations. And it encourages the fragmentation of interest. And this fragmentation that occurs, this competition, this confrontation that occurs, you end up seeing it throughout society. If your highest leaders are having these bitter, hostile disputes between each other, that ends up trickling down. People see that and they're like, well, these people are my enemies. These Republicans are my enemies. These Democrats are my enemies, right? China doesn't do that, though. Chinese democracy, in contrast, is a consensus-finding process. So within the CPC, they try to find a consensus. The different factions try to persuade people of their viewpoint, and that ensures that policymaking is always moving forward with the country's core objectives firmly in sight. So you might have an overall objective, and then different factions within the party have different ideas about how to reach that objective, and they try to persuade people of their viewpoint, and then a consensus is reached. And so there's a democratic process within the CPC and within the Chinese government as a whole in order to figure out what is the best solution to solving this problem. And if you know anything about the decision-making research literature, that's exactly how you should be doing things. The way the West is doing things is terrible. It's absolutely terrible. So Yan concludes, let the flower of democracy in China bloom even more colorfully. Let the light of Chinese democracy shine even brighter so that China can help mankind transcend its narrow, superficial, and inferior view of democracy and contribute to the building of a better, higher quality form of democracy for humanity in the 21st century. Okay, so I think that's a good stopping point. This is a decently long video anyways. There's more that I'm going to talk about here, but I'm going to talk about it in a separate video. Whoops, I clicked something there. But I'm going to talk about this in a separate video. This next part here, China and the West have provided different answers to these 6 questions on democracy. And I think it's worth getting into that. What are these 6 questions and what are the different answers? And so if you want to see that video, please follow me and subscribe to our channel because it'll be uploaded in a few days. And please like this video if you liked my commentary or analysis, if you thought that this article was something that we should review and thought it was worthwhile and you learned something from it, please like the video. And just thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Please provide a comment in the comment section, critique, anything you want to say. I love reading those, even if it's something that is a criticism. It's all fun to me. So thanks for watching, and I hope you have a good rest of your day. Bye.